Good morning, friends. Hello, welcome back to our streams and to Sutta study with Bhante Suddhaso. We had a few technical glitches this morning, but I hope we have resolved them and everything should be all right. All right, so this morning we will be studying the Caṅki Sutta. So get the link for you. Here you go. Yeah, MN95. And here is the Sutta. And welcome to Geeta, Michael, and hello Jens, Ela, and Galaxy from Malaysia, and all our other friends who are watching. And of course, welcome to Bhante Suddhaso. All right, so we can start.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassam. Well, good morning, friends, and welcome back to our Dharma live streams. So we took a 2-week break while we were on retreat here at the monastery, which was lovely and refreshing and much needed. And now we're resuming our ongoing programs. As mentioned, today we'll be looking at the Caṅki Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 95. And since this is one of the longer suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya, we'll be doing it in 3 parts. So today we'll look at the first third or so of the sutta, and then we'll finish it tomorrow and the next day. And as usual, I'll leave some time at the end for questions, if you have any questions about what we cover this morning. So as usual, I'll read through the discourse and periodically give some explanations, and then we'll pause at the end for questions. So the sutta begins. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was traveling among the Kosalans, together with a large group of monks, when he came to Upasada, a Kosalan village of Brahmins. There the Blessed One lived north of Upasada in Angel's Grove, a grove of sal trees. At that time, the Brahmin Caṅki was living in Upasada, a place filled with living beings, grass, lumber, water, and grain that had been given to him as a royal endowment of divine quality from King Pasenadi of Kosala. In other words, Caṅki was incredibly wealthy, as he was effectively the owner of a whole village and all the lands surrounding it. And this had been a gift to him from the king of the country. And King Pasenadi, by the way, was a follower of the Buddha, so he was a very devout disciple of the Buddha. And many of the well-known Brahmins in Kosala were also students of the Buddha. So while Caṅki, the Brahmin Caṅki himself wasn't necessarily a Buddhist, he had a lot of respect for the Buddha, as you'll see as we start going through the sutta. So the sutta continues. The Brahmin householders of Upasada heard. It seems the contemplative Gotama, son of a Sakyan, a renunciant from the Sakya clan, is traveling among the Kosalans together with a large group of monks, and has arrived at Upasada and is living north of Upasada in Angel's Grove, a grove of sal trees. This good report has come up about the Honorable Gotama. He is a blessed one, a worthy one, a rightly self-awakened one. He has perfect knowledge and conduct. He is a sublime one, a world knower, an unsurpassable trainer of tameable people, a teacher of angels and humans, an awakened one, a blessed one. Having personally attained higher knowledge of it by himself, he explains this world with its angels, demons, divinities, its generation of contemplatives and priests, celestial and human beings. He teaches a Dhamma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in its conclusion, with the right meaning and phrasing. He reveals a spiritual life that is completely perfect and pure. it is good to see such worthy beings. So this is a fairly standard description that we see in the suttas. So after the Buddha attained awakening and started teaching, then rumors started to spread throughout northern India that there was this incredible teacher, this incredible monk who had attained some exceptional degree of wisdom, some exceptional degree of spiritual purity and insight. And this is the standard description of the rumor, what you see listed here. So the description of the 9 qualities of the Buddha, Itipiso Bhagava Araham Sama Sambuddho, etc. And the statement that he explains the world in all of its facets and details through personal knowledge, through direct understanding. So this is also a distinction from the other philosophers and religious teachers of the time, is that the other spiritual teachers of the time were teaching things that they had thought up. Again, like Western philosophy, when you get some smart guys who sit around and think up interesting ideas, which don't necessarily have any basis in experience or fact. It's just things that people invent, or people who teach things based purely on faith, or based on tradition, or based upon what their teacher's teacher said. So those are all people who are describing the world not based on direct experience, but based upon something else, based upon their own ideas, or based upon tradition, or based upon faith, or based upon whatever. So part of this remarkable rumor that was spreading about the Buddha was that the Buddha was somebody who was explaining the world based on direct understanding of it through personal experience. So not just repeating something based on faith, or just something he'd invented through logic or whatever. And also noting that he teaches a Dhamma that's good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in its conclusion. So this is emphasizing the fact that what the Buddha is teaching is something which is, it brings joy and purity at every step of the path. So many of the other spiritual traditions at the time taught that one had to experience a lot of pain and suffering and difficult, unpleasant practices, and you would be miserable for decades until one day, bam, suddenly it would all click and make sense. So, for example, practices of going around naked all the time, or practices of engaging in various forms of self-torment or self-torture. One fairly well-known sutta is the one about the 2 non-Buddhist monks, one who acts like a dog and one who acts like a cow. Again, on the belief that if they did this practice for a long time, it would be terrible and painful and a miserable ordeal, but eventually it would bring some wisdom and understanding. So there was a pervasive understanding at the time that spiritual practice tended to involve a lot of pain and misery and torment, but that eventually at some point in the future it would pay off. But the Dhamma the Buddha was teaching was different. The Buddha was teaching a way of living a spiritual life which was joyful in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end, which brought good results when practiced a little bit, and good results when practiced a lot, and good results when practiced completely. So this was also something which was remarkable for people because it was different from what they were used to hearing. It wasn't like what was being taught by other teachers. So then naturally, when these rumors started spreading around, whenever the Buddha came close to an area, then people would go out to see him. They would go to see this amazing teacher that they had heard about. So that's what happens here. The sutta continues. Then groups of Brahmin householders left from Uposatha through its northern entrance and went towards Angel's Grove, the grove of salt trees. On this occasion, the Brahmin Caṅki had gone to the daybed at the top of his mansion. He saw that groups of Brahmin householders had left Uposatha through its northern entrance and were going to Angel's Grove, the grove of salt trees. Having seen this, he said to Katta, Katta is apparently the name of a friend or servant of his. He says, Sir Katta, why have groups of Brahmin householders left Uposatha through its northern entrance and are going towards Angel's Grove, the grove of salt trees? And Katta replies, Sir Caṅki, the contemplative Gautama has arrived, and he repeats the rumors about the Buddha. And he says they go to see the Honorable Gautama. So these people are going to see the Buddha. And so Caṅki says to Katta, he says, therefore, Sir Katta, approach the Brahmin householders from Uposatha and say to them, Sirs, the Brahmin Caṅki says, please wait, the Brahmin Caṅki also wishes to go and see the contemplative Gautama. Yes, sir, Katta replied to the Brahmin Caṅki. He approached the Brahmin householders from Uposatha and said to them, Sirs, the Brahmin Caṅki says, please wait, the Brahmin Caṅki also wishes to go and see the contemplative Gautama. So the Brahmin Caṅki wanted to go along with the other Brahmins to go and visit the Buddha. And the sutta says, at that time there were 500 Brahmins from several other countries visiting Uposatha on some errand. So a brief note about Pali, when you see the word 500, don't take it literally. 500 is just a general word that means a lot. So it might have been 300 or it might have been 700 or we don't know exactly how many. So about 500. Those Brahmins heard. Apparently the Brahmin Caṅki will go to see the contemplative Gautama. Then those Brahmins went to the Brahmin Caṅki and said to him, Sir Caṅki, is it true that you will go to see the contemplative Gautama? And he replies, it is true, sirs, that I am thinking I will go to see the contemplative Gautama. And the Brahmins say, Sir Caṅki, don't go to see the contemplative Gautama. It is not proper for Sir Caṅki to go to see the contemplative Gautama. It is proper for the contemplative Gautama to come to see Sir Caṅki. In other words, from their perspective, Sir Caṅki, the Brahmin Caṅki, was of the higher rank, was the more important person. So the Buddha is the one who should be coming to see Sir Caṅki. So there's the implication here that if the Brahmin Caṅki goes to see the Buddha, then that means that Caṅki is implicitly stating that he considers the Buddha superior. And the Brahmins don't want to see the Brahmin Caṅki to be perceived as inferior to the Buddha. So here the visiting Brahmins give a list of reasons why they think Sir Caṅki should go, why they think Sir Caṅki should wait for the Buddha to come to him. They say, Sir Caṅki has a pure family lineage through both maternal and paternal lines as far back as the 7th ancestor. He is flawless and irreproachable when speaking of birth. For this reason, it is not proper for Sir Caṅki to go to see the contemplative Gautama. It is proper for the contemplative Gautama to come to see Sir Caṅki. So the Brahmins at that time, and this continues to modern day India for that matter, placed tremendous importance on family lineage. So there was an idea that if your parents had been Brahmins and your grandparents had been Brahmins and your great-grandparents had been Brahmins as far back as 7 generations, then that meant that you were a pure Brahmin. That meant that you were inherently holy just because you had been born in a family line of holy people. And there's other suttas where the Buddha completely rejects this belief. The Vaseta Sutta is a standard example of this, where the Buddha completely rejects the idea that one is pure because of what one's parents did, or that one can be called holy just because of what one's ancestors did. The Buddha was very clear that what matters is what we do here and now, not what our parents or our family members did. But the Brahmins are saying Caṅki has this pure family lineage of Brahmins, which means he's inherently holy, inherently pure. Whereas the Buddha, who knows what his family was like? The next reason they give, they say Sir Caṅki is wealthy, very wealthy, extremely wealthy. Because, of course, they had the view that if you have lots of money, that must mean that you're somehow more worthy than other people. This might sound familiar since a lot of people still believe that these days. Then they say, Sir Caṅki is a master of the 3 Vedas, including all 5 of its divisions. He knows words and phrases, he knows philosophy, he knows all the characteristics of great people. In other words, they're pointing out that the Brahmin Caṅki was a master of Brahmanic philosophy. He was a master of the Brahmin scriptures that were available at the time, which in modern terms, this is the older strata of Hindu texts, is what they're referring to. Then they say, the next reason they give, they say, Sir Caṅki is handsome, good-looking, delightful, as beautiful as a magnificent flower, divinely beautiful, divinely splendid, such as is rarely seen. Because, of course, not only was he wealthy, but he was also pretty. So this also is kind of indicating the shallowness of the Brahmins. They're like, hey, you're so pretty. He should come and see you because you're the pretty one here. Then they say, Sir Caṅki is virtuous. He has an elder's virtue. He has attained an elder's virtue. This also is interesting in that they are here praising the value of virtue, but they're connecting it with age. They're saying just because you're old, that means that you naturally have the virtue and goodness that an old person has. So this also is a little bit strange. There's a number of suttas where the Buddha quite clearly states that someone's worth is not in any way connected to their age. There's a sutta where, again, a group of elderly Brahmins come to the Buddha and start criticizing him, saying like, oh, you don't properly respect elders. And the Buddha's like, I do not think the word elder means what you think it means. And he goes on to explain that someone can be called an elder not based upon how many years they have, but rather based upon how well developed their morality and wisdom are. And he says, even a youth, even a young person, still with all the vibrancy of a young body, still with the dark hair of a young person, even a youth who has well-refined morality and wisdom can properly be called an elder. And he says that even if somebody is physically old, if they lack morality and wisdom, then they are not worthy of the word elder. So the Buddha defined the word elder based upon the development of one's spiritual faculties, not upon one's age. But the Brahmins, again, they took a somewhat different perspective. They saw that age inherently brought spiritual development, that age inherently brought a quality of virtue and praiseworthiness. Then they say, the next reason they give, they say, Sir Caṅki has moral speech, moral conversation, humane speech. He is eloquent, articulate, communicative. Those are all good qualities. I agree that those are good qualities. They say, Sir Caṅki is the teacher of many teachers, and he teaches mantras to 300 students. So here they're emphasizing the fact that Sir Caṅki is already a very well-established teacher in his own right. So if he goes to see the Buddha, again, that's making the implication that Sir Caṅki still has things to learn, that Sir Caṅki is lacking complete mastery. If he goes to see another teacher, that's implying that he's not fully developed in his understanding, which actually shouldn't be a problem. It's actually a sign of humility if one is willing to go and learn from other teachers. There's a really lovely thing when I was visiting Jongyen Monastery, where Bhikkhu Bodhi stays, many years ago, there was a fairly junior monk who was giving a talk. And Bhikkhu Bodhi went to listen to the talk. And the monk who was giving the talk, he asked Bhikkhu Bodhi, like, why are you here? Like, I'm a junior monk and you're this extremely respected elder. Like, why are you coming to listen to my talk? And Bhikkhu Bodhi said, well, you never know, I might learn something. So it's this really beautiful example of humility, of even if somebody is a very senior, well-respected teacher and scholar, it's having that mind of always thinking, maybe there's something more for me to learn. Maybe I can learn from somebody else. Similarly, there's a Zen story there was a Zen master and somebody asked him, how do you train yourself? And the Zen master replied, even if I meet a 5-year-old child, if they have something to teach, then I will listen. And even if I meet an 80-year-old person, if they have something to learn, I will speak. So again, completely discarding this whole idea of like, I am the teacher, therefore I have nothing to learn. But always cultivating this attitude of anybody who has something potentially useful, I will listen and see if there's something valuable here. Then they say, Sir Caṅki is honored, respected, revered, venerated, and esteemed by King Pasenadi of Kosala. And the next one, honored, respected, revered, venerated, and esteemed by the Brahmin Sati. So here they're playing up his fame and the fact that he is respected by other famous people. So again, wealth, beauty, fame, all the usual shallow things that people like to praise. Then they point out, Sir Caṅki lives in Upasada, a place filled with living beings, grass, lumber, water, and grain, that had been given to him as a royal endowment of divine quality from King Pasenadi of Kosala. So again, emphasizing his wisdom and his wealth and power, emphasizing his secular power, his power over property and other people. And they say, again, for all these reasons, they say, for this reason, it is not proper for Sir Caṅki to go to see the contemplative Gautama. It is proper for the contemplative Gautama to come to see Sir Caṅki. When this was said, the Brahmin Caṅki said to those Brahmins, now, sirs, listen to me as to why it is proper for me to go to see the contemplative Gautama and why it is not proper for Sir Gautama to come to see me. Sir Caṅki says, the contemplative Gautama has a pure family lineage through both maternal and paternal lines as far back as the 7th ancestor. He is flawless and irreproachable when speaking of birth. So this is interesting in that he knows the Brahmins place such tremendous importance on family lineage. So naturally he starts with that. So the Buddha came from a family lineage of aristocrats, of the noble ruling class of ancient India, the Khatyas. So he's not from a Brahmin family, but he's from what the Brahmins considered second best, which was a Khatya family, the family of noble aristocrats. So all of the kings and queens and rulers of the land were always from the Khatya clans, from the aristocrat families. So he's saying, yeah, I've got a pure Brahmin lineage, that's true. But Sir Gautama has a pure Khatya lineage. He has a pure royal lineage. He's of royal blood, as far back as we know. Then he says, the contemplative Gautama left behind abundant gold and silver and became a renunciant, living on the earth in the open air. So the Brahmins had praised Caṅki for being extremely wealthy. But Caṅki says, yeah, the Buddha was extremely wealthy, but he willingly left it all behind in order to live a very simple life, unfettered by possessions, unfettered by wealth. So he's kind of one-upping them. He's like, yeah, I've got money, but I'm still clinging to it. The Buddha had money, but he left it behind to live a pure life, a simple life. Then he says, the contemplative Gautama left the household life and became a homeless renunciant, while he was still young, youthful, dark-haired, blessed with youthfulness in the first stage of his life. So here emphasizing, once again, the renunciation power of the Buddha. So commonly in the Brahmanic traditions, there was the idea that you would start off living an ordinary household life. So get a job, raise a family, accumulate wealth. And then when you start getting old and you're not good for much of anything anymore, then you would shave off what little hair you have left and go off and become a monk. Like, well, you don't have anything to lose at that point, so you might as well. But he's saying the Buddha, on the other hand, even when he was still young, he had all the blessings of a youth. He left behind a comfortable household life. He left behind ordinary worldly comforts and pursuits and went off to become a monastic. Isn't that remarkable? Isn't that respectable and praiseworthy? The next one, similarly, he says, the contemplative Gautama cut off his hair and beard, put on brown robes, and left the household life to become a homeless renunciant, even though his mother and father did not want it and wept with tearful faces. So again, emphasizing that the Buddha not only left behind a lot of wealth and left behind the opportunity to have a pleasant, youthful life as a householder, but he left behind his parents. He left behind his loving parents. He went against his parents' wishes. And for those of us who were raised in America, this actually doesn't sound particularly special. It's like, oh, I go against my parents' wishes all the time. What's the big deal? But in ancient India, as it is even to this day in many cultures, Asian cultures and also some parts of Western culture, family is extremely important. And to go against your parents' wishes is something which is not done lightly. Going against your parents' wishes, doing something they really don't want you to do, is something that you would only do if you felt it was more important than anything else. It's something you would only do if you felt that it was of critical, dire importance, to the point where it was worth damaging your family relationship. Again, it's a bit different in contemporary American culture. We often don't place quite as much importance on family. But in ancient India, family was everything. Family was the most important thing. So to leave behind your family to become a monk when your family doesn't approve was seen as not being irresponsible, but rather an act of great renunciation, an act of incredible resolve and determination to take such an extreme step. So this is another reason why he says the Buddha is more praiseworthy than himself. Then he says, the contemplative Gautama is handsome, good-looking, delightful, as beautiful as a magnificent flower, divinely beautiful, divinely splendid, such as is rarely seen. So the same praise that the Brahmin said towards him, he was like, yeah, I'm pretty. The Buddha's pretty too. The Buddha's really handsome. And this is a quality of the Buddha. This is mentioned in many places in the suttas. The Buddha was, in fact, extremely good-looking. The Buddha was extremely handsome. And that's the result of all the good karma he accumulated over hundreds of lifetimes as he was developing the virtues that culminated in him becoming a Buddha. So all of those virtues and qualities and perfections that he developed over hundreds of lifetimes meant that in his final lifetime, he was physically very beautiful, he was wealthy, he was powerful, he had accumulated all the ordinary worldly blessings of good karma, as well as the transcendent blessings of spiritual karma. Then he says, the contemplative Gautama is virtuous. He has a noble being's virtue. He has wholesome virtue. He has attained wholesome virtue. Again, noticing the distinction here. When the Brahmins were praising Caṅki, they were saying, oh, you have the virtue of an old person. So because you're old, you're virtuous by default. But he's saying the Buddha is different. The Buddha has the virtue of a noble being. So a noble being means someone who has attained spiritual realization, someone who's attained some stage of enlightenment. So he's saying the Buddha's virtue is not just the default virtue of being old, but rather it's the genuine, real virtue that comes from carefully purifying one's own mind and heart. The next one, he says, the contemplative Gautama has moral speech, moral conversation, humane speech. He is eloquent, articulate, communicative. Again, the same qualities that they'd said about Caṅki. He says the Buddha has the same. Says the contemplative Gautama is the teacher of many teachers. Again, the same as him. He says the contemplative Gautama has eliminated all sensual lust and fickleness. So this is one quality that was not said about the Brahman Caṅki, because realistically the Brahman Caṅki had not eliminated his sensual lust, his fickleness, his constant seeking for objects of desire. He knew, so the Brahman Caṅki knew that his own mind was far from pure. His own mind was still dominated by desire and aversion. But he saw that the Buddha had purified his mind. The Buddha was free of lust, was free of fickleness, was free of this desirous, grasping mind. Next, he says, the contemplative Gautama is a proponent of karma, of the efficacy of action. His priority is not to harm the population of Brahmins. So this is an interesting statement, because this is also pointing to the fact that one of the things the Brahmins feared was that the rise of the Buddha's popularity would weaken the grip the Brahmins had over Indian society. As history has played out, that hasn't been the case, by the way. The Brahmins are still pretty solidly in control of Indian society. That hasn't stopped. So the Buddha, as it turns out, actually didn't wind up substantially compromising the Brahmins' grip on Indian society. But the point that he's making here is he's saying, again, the Buddha teaches karma. The Buddha teaches that every action we make produces a corresponding result. So that means the Buddha will never intentionally harm another living being, whether it's a Brahmin or anybody else. So he's saying the Buddha is not here to harm the Brahmins, because the Buddha knows that if he harmed the Brahmins, it would come back to him, that he would just be harming himself. So he's saying we have nothing to fear from the Buddha. He's a completely harmless person who teaches that we should only do wholesome actions. We should only do beneficial actions and nothing else. Then he says, the contemplative Gautama is a renunciant from a lofty family, an unbroken aristocrat family. Again, as mentioned earlier, he's emphasizing the Buddha is a refined nobleman. The Buddha is not some uncultured, unsophisticated peasant. He is a highly refined, cultured nobleman. So again, this is another reason why he's saying that it is proper for him to go and pay respects to the Buddha, rather than just waiting for the Buddha to come see him. Next, he says the contemplative Gautama is a renunciant from a wealthy family, very wealthy, extremely wealthy. Again, playing the money card. People come from distant kingdoms and distant countries to ask questions of the contemplative Gautama. Here he's emphasizing people come from all over to see the Buddha. And at that time, traveling was a lot harder than it is these days. You didn't just jump on a plane and in a few hours you're on the other side of the world. In ancient India, if you wanted to travel anywhere, even traveling a few hundred miles was a serious ordeal. You might be traveling on foot, or you might be traveling in an ox cart, or you might be traveling on a horse. But it was not something you did lightly. Traveling even a few dozen miles away from your home was something that was rarely done. You would only do that if it was really important, if it was something really major. And it was also risky. So northern India at that time was overrun with brigands and bandits and thieves. It was very dangerous to travel between inhabited areas. So people did not travel lightly or easily. So the fact that people would travel from all over to come to see the Buddha is emphasizing how remarkable the Buddha was. Then he says, several thousand angels have gone to the Buddha for lifelong refuge. So what he's emphasizing here is that even celestial beings, divine beings, regard the Buddha as a teacher. So this is one of the qualities of the Buddha, is that he's the teacher of both celestial beings and humans. So this also is important because otherwise people might say, oh, well, yeah, the Buddha is a great human, but the gods are better than the Buddha. But it's very clear in the suttas, no, nobody's better than the Buddha. The Buddha's wisdom is impeccable, unassailable. Only another enlightened being can match the Buddha's wisdom. So since the vast majority of celestial beings are not enlightened, then a lot of them take refuge in the Buddha. They go to the Buddha as their teacher. Then he repeats the standard qualities of the Buddha. He says, this good report has come up about the contemplative Gautama. He is a blessed one, a worthy one, a rightly self-awakened one. He has perfect knowledge and conduct. He is a sublime one, a world knower, an unsurpassable trainer of tameable people, a teacher of angels and humans, an awakened one, a blessed one. The standard list of the 9 qualities of the Buddha. Then next he says, the contemplative Gautama has the 32 characteristics of a great person, which are not listed in the sutta, so I won't talk about them in detail. Briefly speaking, the Buddha has all of the recognized characteristics and qualities of a great person. Next, he says, King Sanya Bimbisara of Magadha, as well as his sons and daughters, have gone to the contemplative Gautama for lifelong refuge. King Pasenadi of Kosala, the Brahmin Prokrasati, so all of these, as well as their children, have gone to the Buddha for lifelong refuge. So again, he's saying, yeah, so King Pasenadi and the Brahmin Prokrasati, these famous, powerful people, respect me, but the Buddha is their teacher. The Buddha is who they rely upon for spiritual guidance. The Buddha is who they see as the genuine authority on the spiritual life. So again, he's emphasizing why the Buddha should properly be considered as being of a higher status than himself. And finally, he says, the contemplative Gautama has arrived at Upasada and is living north of Upasada in Angel's Grove, a grove of sal trees. Contemplatives and Brahmins who come to our villages and fields are our guests. Guests are to be honored, respected, revered, venerated, and esteemed by us. Since the contemplative Gautama has arrived at Upasada and is living north of Upasada in Angel's Grove, a grove of sal trees, the contemplative Gautama is our guest. A guest is to be honored, respected, revered, venerated, and esteemed by us. So I find this last one really endearing, very sweet. He's like, well, first he gives this long list of praises of the Buddha, why the Buddha is a wonderful being. But then finally he just says, look, this guy's our guest. And it's proper to be hospitable and respectful towards your guests. So it's really, I personally find it really lovely that he comes to this principle of hospitality. He's saying, setting everything else aside, we should express our hospitality towards a visiting spiritual practitioner. So he gives all this as the reasons why it's proper for him to see the Buddha rather than waiting for the Buddha to come see him. And he says, sirs, although I am able to praise Sir Gautama to this extent, this is not the limit of Sir Gautama's praiseworthiness. Sir Gautama's praiseworthiness is unlimited. In other words, he's saying this is just a fragment of the amazingness of the Buddha. No words can touch how remarkable the Buddha is. And he says, even if he had just one of these traits, it would not be proper for Sir Gautama to come to see me, and it would be proper for me to go to see Sir Gautama. Therefore, sirs, now we will all go to see the contemplative Gautama. So I find this really cute. So the Brahmins came to try to convince Caṅki to not go see the Buddha. And now Caṅki is like, now all of us are going. You're coming too. So now he's getting all of them to go and see the Buddha. So I think at this point, it's getting close to 9, so we'll go ahead and pause there and switch to questions, and then we'll pick up part 2 of the sutta tomorrow.
Right, thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And in the meanwhile, welcome to some friends who have joined us, Mark and Musin. We don't have any questions for the time being, but we have a few comments. Oh, hello, Ainat, good to see you. And Michael was might add that he also left his child and his wife behind, both of whom later became monastics, taking refuge in the Buddha.
Yeah, that's also considered part of the great renunciation of the Buddha. So that the Buddha had this beautiful, loving family. So he had a wife who loved him very much. He had a newborn child. And he also left them behind to go off and seek enlightenment. That's also part of the Buddha's great renunciation.
And Gita is sharing how caring for the family. Bhante, this is true even today. Family is everything in India and in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
I remember every day as children, we worshipped our parents every day. Also in Thailand, actually. Very present.
Yeah, we didn't do that in my family.
We have an in-between in Italy.
You don't bow to your parents in Italy?
We don't bow, no. But the previous generations were, I think they would kiss their hands.
Oh.
That's how you were trained. And you would speak in the third person, which is the formal way of speaking to others. I didn't have any of that because I'm like the new, younger, reformed generations. But I heard that's how it used to be back in the day. All right, that's all it seems. So we will be studying the rest of the sutta with Bhante tomorrow morning and the day after tomorrow. And in the evening at 7:30 p.m. New York City time, we will have Dhamma talks. Actually, I think Bhante Suddhaso will be talking about bodhicitta this evening.
Or maybe Ayasoma will be talking about bodhicitta this evening.
We will see. You will only find out by tuning in at 7:30 p.m. on BNN. And tomorrow there will be another session with in the evening. And on Friday evening, we'll have monk chat. So any questions that you have that are Dharma related or Buddhist related, or at least somewhat related, we will try our best to answer them. So you can bring them for monk chat in the evening. And if you are physically around the monastery, which is located in West Orange, New Jersey, right outside New York City, this Saturday, Bhante and I will go for our first socially distant alms round locally. And in the evening, at the farmers market here in West Orange, and in the evening, we will be doing our first outdoor meditation here at the monastery. So you can bring your mask and be a little bit distant from other fellow practitioners, but at the same time, close in with the heart and in practice. So you're welcome to join us this Saturday. It will also be Bhante Suddhaso's birthday on August 1st.
1 year closer to death.
Or 1 year closer to enlightenment.
I hope so.
And may this be Bhante Suddhaso's last rebirth. And may all beings attain awakening. So we can end the morning session with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right, see you in a couple of hours.